For the next 15 seconds, picture yourself in a small town. Historic buildings with galleries, restaurants, micro-distilleries. Forested ridgelines on the horizon. Wide alpine meadows. Evergreen forests threaded with trails. Friendly locals eager to guide you. And if you're not quite ready to leave this fantasy, chances are you're our kind. And you should check out visitparkcity.com right away. Park City, Utah, for the mountain kind.
When you visit a state as big and diverse as Texas, there are a million different trips you can take. Let's say you've got an appetite for whitewater kayaking. You can get your own, so this is why they call it Devil's River, trip to Texas. Or maybe you have an actual appetite. I'll take a pound of brisket, 6 ribs, 3 links of sausage, and a piece of pecan pie. Trip to Texas. Go to traveltexas.com/get-your-own for the only trip to Texas that matters. Yours.
Travel is great, but planning for travel can be time-consuming and difficult. That's where One Travel comes in. With One Travel, you'll find everything you need to book the perfect trip. Flights, hotels, cars, transportation, it's all right there. With One Travel, you can book online, via app, or even pick up the phone and talk to a travel advisor ready to help you make your selections. Visit onetravel.com/music or call 855-437-2154. Plan it, book it, live it. One Travel.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 120 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back, welcome aboard. Today I am speaking with Bill Sharpsteen. He is a hiker, backpacker, canyoneer, author, journalist, photographer, and he runs the YouTube channel Mr. Hall's Trail Guide. So I'm not going to eat up a lot of time here at the top of the show because we have a lot to talk about. So let's go talk to Bill Sharpsteen about all variety of topics, including a PCT attempt in the 1970s, a through hike of the Camino de Santiago last year, canyoneering in Death Valley and Zion, the realities of building his own home, his history in journalism across Alaska, California, other places, the various books he's written, being attacked by sled dogs, and what he gets out of that YouTube channel. So lots to talk about. So let's go to Sylmar. Let's go to that self-built home and hear about all of these topics with Bill Sharpsteen.
For the next 15 seconds, picture yourself in a small town. Historic buildings with galleries, restaurants, micro-distilleries. Forested ridgelines on the horizon. Wide alpine meadows. Evergreen forests threaded with trails. Friendly locals eager to guide you. And if you're not quite ready to leave this fantasy, chances are you're our kind. And you should check out visitparkcity.com right away. Park City, Utah, for the mountain kind.
When it comes to family vacations, there are a million different trips you can take. You can get your own trip to Texas. Or if you prefer a vacation from your family, you can always get your own leave the kids with grandma trip to Texas. So go to traveltexas.com/get-your-own for the only trip to Texas that matters. Yours.
Travel is great, but planning for travel can be time-consuming and difficult. That's where One Travel comes in. With One Travel, you'll find everything you need to book the perfect trip. Flights, hotels, cars, transportation, it's all right there. With One Travel, you can book online, via app, or even pick up the phone and talk to a travel advisor ready to help you make your selections. Visit onetravel.com/music or call 855-437-2154. Plan it, book it, live it. One Travel.
My name is Bill Sharpsteen, and I'm a freelance writer and photographer and videographer. I do a YouTube channel called Mr. Hall's Trail Guide. And so that's been my big obsession right now. But I'm also working on my third book, which is a memoir loosely based on building this house that we're in right now, which took 7 long years. And so what I did was I started exploring how I became the person I am today that got me to actually taking on such a complex and a difficult project as this, because we did just about all the work ourselves. The book project, the YouTube channel, keeps me pretty busy. And then, of course, I do some backpacking, a lot of hiking, canyoneering, love canyoneering, mountain climbing every once in a while. I did all the 14ers just a few years ago. So I keep pretty busy on the outdoor and indoor.
Yeah, so as you know, this is an outdoor-based podcast, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing we're going to talk about. But what I do think is going to be interesting about you is how your professional life plus the outdoors all kind of meld together in a particular way. So let's do the typical thing we do on this show and run back, way back in time to when you were younger and kind of the paths that brought you to both of those, the paths that brought you to the outdoors, but then also the paths that brought you to journalism and the various other aspects of your writing career and all of that.
I got interested in the outdoors when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old because I'd hear my father, who was in the Boy Scouts, talk so glowingly and lovingly about hiking with the Boy Scouts in the Sierras and that sort of thing. He grew up in the Oakland area. I thought, this sounds so amazing. So he said, join the Cub Scouts and get started there. And I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll get into the Cub Scouts, did all this stupid, weird stuff that Boy Scouts do, the soapbox derby and all that crap. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
That's funny. The first thing I was going to mention was Pinewood Derby.
Oh, it was just utter nonsense, but, everybody was really into it. I got to the point of Webelos, which is that, like weird thing between Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. I really don't know the point of it. And I'll never forget, we started having to learn how to tie knots. I thought, this is, I just want to go backpacking. I just want to go camping. And so I went to my dad and I said, well, wait a minute. Is this what, how come I'm having to learn to tie knots? And he said, well, when you go camping, you're always going to be tested on different things out there. And I went, I don't want to be tested. I just want to go camping. So I quit. Screw this.
So you're a Cub Scout dropout?
Oh, hell yeah. I know. I'm proud of it. I have friends who were Eagle Scouts and thought it was the best experience of their life. And I guess it just wouldn't have matched my temperament or something like that.
You're just too anti-authoritarian. Is that what you're telling us?
Something that is a good way of putting it. Yeah, absolutely. And then when I was in 8th grade, I had a math teacher named Mr. Hall.
Oh, so are we getting the secret background to the name of the
absolutely.
YouTube channel?
Well, what happened was every once in a while, he'd bring in a slide projector and show pictures of his backpacking trips or hiking trips that he had done recently. And I went, man, this is what I want to do so much. He and some other teachers would take out students, mainly during the summer, and I started trying to worm my way into that little cabal there. And finally, when I was, I guess, a sophomore in high school, junior in high school, I got invited. What we did was we went on something like a 5-day backpacking trip along the ocean, along the beach in the Olympic National Park. And I just fell in love with it. I just thought, this is exactly what I want to do. And so ever since then, I've been out backpacking, hiking whenever I can. A friend and I tried to hike the Pacific Crest Trail in 1975 when there really wasn't much of a trail there to begin with. Unfortunately, we picked a year that was super rainy, super snowy, a lot of late snows, and so we got as far as Forester Pass. We got up and over that by the skin of our teeth.
Was it still snow covered at that point?
It was ice covered.
Ice covered. And so people that don't know, Forester Pass is in the Sierra Nevada.
Yes.
If you're on the JMT, which in this point would coincide with the PCT, it's the highest pass.
13,200 feet?
Something like that.
Yeah.
13.5, 13.2, something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's a considerable height, and it's relatively steep on either side.
Yes.
And so ice covered, that could be quite a concern.
Oh, yeah. Well, fortunately, the trail used to go through a place called Weldon, and there was a KOA there. We stopped at the KOA. We called up our parents and said, we just found out there's a whole bunch of snow up there. We need to get crampons. And we had ice axes with us. There was a whole collection of PCT hikers there. Some of them, some of the stories were just amazing. There was these two brothers from New York who had never hiked in their lives. And one was getting regular cortisone shots for his feet because he was having such a problem hiking. And so everybody was, it's supposed to be 20 feet of snow up in the Sierras, and everybody was all freaked out. So we got the crampons, and we went up, as I say, we got as far as Forester Pass. We'd only used the crampons once, but we camped at the bottom of Forester Pass, and there's this chute. During the summer, when there's no snow, the chute isn't really visible, but there's this chute that is probably about 50 feet wide that runs down from the pass itself, and it's probably... if you get to the chute, you've probably done about 80%, 90% of the climb. And that chute, because it was concave, it was covered in shade most of the day, and it was just pure solid ice. Now, fortunately, there was someone who passed us up, and that evening while we were camped, he went up and over Forester, and so all the snow and the ice was a little soft, and he left big footprints for us. We got our crampons on, and we have our ice axes, and we get to this chute, and you would put your foot in one of these footsteps, and your foot would slide around. And my heart was in my throat because I realized that if I fell, I wouldn't be able to self-arrest on that ice.
Right, because you can't jab into the ice.
No, it was, as I say, just absolute solid ice. Obviously, I survived. When we got down on the other side into the Bubbs Creek area there, we just said, nah, this is too much. Because we were starting to run low on food. And being the stupid asses that we were, we thought we were going to be able to get all the way to Twomley Meadows on the food that we had in our packs.
Yeah. If you were running out at Bubbs Creek,
Yeah, we had the whole High Sierra still to go. You were telling me about your experience. Yeah, we were going maybe a mile an hour most of the time because we were, especially in the afternoon, we were post-holing up to our hips a lot of the times in the snow. So, we were not getting very far.
Yeah, it's like you can only move so quickly because of the environment, but then also there's more navigating challenges because there's no clear delineated trail at that point. You're doing a bit of route finding and sometimes maybe getting off course also. And you said this is 75. So
75.
I'm going to make some assumptions. External frame pack. Yes? No?
Yeah, it was.
Which, and probably heavy as hell, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. When we left Weldon, we have 70 pounds on our backs. It was pretty difficult.
Yeah,
I'm glad I was
really
21 at the time.
Take up ice. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Yeah. It was a nasty thing, but it became my obsession. I still haven't finished it. I started doing like sections at a time and that sort of thing. And then life started getting in the way because part of the problem when you try to do individual sections of the PCT, it becomes a logistical challenge in terms of transportation. Because my friends in LA were semi-willing to drop me off or pick me up or something like that around here. We got as far north, my wife and I, to Lake Tahoe. I don't know how I'm ever going to convince someone from around here to drive me up to Lake Tahoe and drop me off.
Right.
I still think I could do it, but it would be like, maybe the next trip being 600 miles to the Oregon border or something like that. And as I say, life gets in the way.
Do you think it'd be feasible at this point to try to do the whole thing in one go?
Gloria and I, my wife, thought about doing that. And I think she sort of lost her enthusiasm for the idea. I'm not enthusiastic about leaving my wife for 3 months, which is really what, that's what it boils down to, something like that, when you do something that long. I met a lot of people on the PCT who were doing just that. I don't know. I just can't envision doing something like that. it seems like too much of an imposition on your spouse to do, to go away that long. And you do read, I'll read, like these adventure writers, like in Outside Magazine and things like that. They're always leaving their family to do these impossible trips. I really feel sorry for the families.
All right, so then it sounds like you're going to have to figure out these logistics, is what you're saying.
They're going to have to figure out the logistics,
Because you still have, half of the trail left
Half
to
of
go
the trail
then?
to go, yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I did like a 100-mile section in Oregon, but I'd probably just end up just repeating it, to make things easier, and another 100-miler in the Cascades. But as I say, probably just have to just repeat the whole thing over again.
You were 21 when you attempted it. You get turned around because of snow and ice.
Yes. Well, also, the PCT at that time, as I say, was probably 30% built, if that. I mean, through the Sierras, it was just copying over on the JMT and still does. But in Southern California, we were walking along paved roads at times. A lot of the route duplicated what was known as the California Riding and Hiking Trail. That was mainly fire roads and that sort of thing. I've redone those sections on the completed PCT. The completed PCT is so much better.
Yeah, I would assume if you're stuck on roads and fire roads, it's far less interesting than an established trail through wilderness.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember once walking along the paved road in the San Felipe Valley, which is just north of San Diego. My feet are just getting raw walking along the asphalt. And so I stop and there's no other place to camp, so I just camped right alongside the road. It was the weirdest experience because all of a sudden at night, I hear these voices off in the dark. And I'm going, where are they coming from? What is this? What is this? Oh, no. And 20 minutes later, these very nice looking people. They were obviously had crossed the Mexican border and were coming into the United States, no doubt illegally because they were staying off the road. And we just looked at each other and I said, hola. And they went, hola. And they looked like, well, he doesn't look like he's going to do anything to us. And so that was that. But I mean, that was the sort of thing that you would probably never see on the PCT now. Mm-hmm. The one thing was, I think there were more towns to go through on the old route. It was a great experience. And the other thing was that we started the first week in April, and this was a heavy snow year. When we were at the Mexican border, it was snowing. We got to the Cuyamaca Mountains like the next day or something like that, and it was just like whiteout conditions. We're camping in brand new, like 3-4 foot of snow.
And this is at the beginning.
This is at the very beginning. Right. I come to find out the guy that I was hiking with had been telling me how hard he was working out and getting in shape and all this, and I was doing the same thing. I was hiking in my neighborhood up in the Seattle area with a big backpack on and getting in great shape, and then I find out he wasn't doing anything. And he is like going really slow, and he's having a hard time. It was very disappointing.
But he got all the way to Forester.
He did get all the way to Forester.
That's an accomplishment, especially in these conditions.
Oh, yeah. Well, we got up and over the Cuyamaca Mountains and into the San Felipe Valley. And then we got to the mountains just above Palm Springs.
Oh, San Jacinto.
San Jacinto, that's it. At that time, the trail, it went through a whole bunch of near towns and things like that. And we're starting up, and then we're getting to Tahquitz Peak. And it was whiteout conditions. I don't know how we got over Tahquitz Peak alive. I mean, we got to the lookout there and took a break inside and then got down, and we got to a place called Hub Junction. We decided we just can't go any farther right now. So we hiked down to Idlewild, and there was no snow there. And we thought, oh, great. And it snowed overnight. We ended up hitchhiking out. And my aunt and uncle lived in Los Angeles, so we stayed there for a couple of weeks and then went back and started near Palmdale.
I was going to ask, when you're up there in the San Jacintos, does it then drop into the Palm Desert?
It does, but what it does is you sort of traverse San Jacinto Peak, and then you go down, and it's just a big plunge into the desert.
That's what I would assume.
And at that time, it went through Whitewater. Now it veers off from Whitewater and then goes up into the mountains there to the Whitewater River. My friend said, well, he wanted to miss those 2 weeks because he didn't want to hike in the desert. And so when we got to the Mojave Desert, he just wanted to hitchhike through the desert. And he told me, well, you can hike it if you want, but I'm going to hitchhike out of here.
That's funny because I thought maybe it would be a nice respite after all of the snow and ice. You guys be like, oh, dry, warmer, flatter land.
Unfortunately, it was a lot of flies.
Oh.
I mean, they would descend on you in 10 seconds, and they were biting flies. Yeah, it was just a miserable experience all the way around. Then we got into this area and more snow. So I think it was more this idea that I didn't accomplish what I set out to accomplish, and that just ate at me for years and years and years. I just, as I say, I just started doing sections of it because that was, in a way, the more practical way to do it at the time.
And now you only have to do the last half. So only, 1,300 miles or something?
Oh, yeah, something like that. 1,300, what the heck? You know, this is not the equivalent, but my wife and I did 400 miles of the Camino de Santiago last September.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
let's do it.
Hey, that sounds great.
Okay. Well, let me tell you.
Let's talk about why you went over there and decided to do that one.
Many years ago, I had read about this the Camino and thought, well, that would be a nice thing to do. I think that sounds kind of cool. I just never really threw it out there to my wife. And then she's the one who said, I really want to do the Camino. I'm in. Let's go.
For the few people listening who don't know what it is, which I think is probably an insubstantial number of people, you should let people know what that trail is. And I know it's not just a single trail. There's like 50 different variations on how to do it.
There is. It actually started out as a pilgrimage, and for a lot of people it still is, a religious pilgrimage. And it started out around the year 900. The pilgrims in the Middle Ages, the idea was, you just walked out your front door and you started walking until you got to this city called Santiago. Now there are defined routes, and we were doing what was called the Frances, the Camino Frances, which starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is a town just north of the Spanish border in France. And from there you go up and over the Pyrenees, and then you basically are working your way west to Santiago, which is this gorgeous city. So this all started with a myth. And this is what fascinates me about the Camino. It started from a myth. And the myth was that James, who was one of Jesus' disciples, had gone to Spain to spread Jesus' word. Never happened. According to the story, angels came to James and said, you got to go back to Judea. He went back to Judea and was immediately beheaded by King Herod. So, first of all, never listen to angels.
Clearly, yeah, clearly.
They're giving bad advice.
Very bad advice.
The angels, all right, they had something on their mind. They took his body, which it was claimed that they were bones at the time. So, and I never really looked into this, but there's this museum that claims to have his head.
Humans are so weird.
And so I don't know whether that's true or not. The angels supposedly took his, maybe the whole thing, I don't know, but his bones, put it into a stone boat with no rudder, managed to get this all the way around to the west coast of Spain, to a place called Finisterre, which means the end of the world. These mythical followers got the bones. This is all myth now. And they hijacked these bones because apparently there was some ruler at the time that wanted the bones because she thought that they were dangerous, that they would cause an uprising or something like that. And they got spirited away and put into a cave. And they sat there for 800 years. And then, I think it was a shepherd or something like that, he saw this bright light off above and in front of him, and he heard angels singing. And this scared the crap out of him. So he went to his local bishop and told him about it, and the bishop put together a search party. And they found this cave, and they found the bones, and there was a note saying, here lies the remains of St. James. He had become a saint since then because early Catholicism, you could become a saint if you had died a martyr for the Christian cause.
What better way to become a martyr than to be fooled by angels into having your head removed?
I know, exactly. And the thing that's mind-boggling to me is they believe the note. They said, well, it must be true.
Right, yeah.
And, and then word got back to the Pope, and the Pope said, sounds good to me. So what they did was they decided, we still do this really as humans, is we take artifacts and sort of venerate them. They took these bones and they decided that they had to go to a place where they could build a cathedral around the bones. They decided on this place that became Santiago de Compostela, which literally means tomb of St. James. So they built this amazing cathedral where the bones are housed. And so the Catholic Church said, go on this pilgrimage, and if you go all the way to Santiago, you will have all your sins absolved. Hell of a deal. They didn't realize this was at the least 800 kilometers of walking. If you started, say, somewhere in France, you walked out your door and you started from there. So it could be 1,000 miles or more before you got to Santiago. And there were thieves along the way. There were wolves on the way. Interestingly enough, innkeepers back then were known to be they were always trying to cheat the pilgrims out of something. It was an arduous journey, to say the least.
But hey, it's worth it for that absolution.
Well, see, here's the weird thing. Also, a lot of them believe that if they had, say, physical problems or they were sick or something like that, being in the presence of the bones would heal them. Now, the Catholic Church also had another issue. At that time in northern Spain, it was being overrun by Muslims. And so there were Christian forces fighting the Muslim forces. And so the church figured if we have all this influx of pilgrims going through there, maybe the Muslims would be discouraged or something like that. I don't know. The Muslims were eventually run out of town, but it took a while. Interestingly enough, in the late 1800s, the church decided to hire some archaeologists because they didn't know where the bones were in the cathedral. So they kind of got lost.
I mean, it sounds like they've gotten lost repeatedly. They sat in a cave for 800 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Theoretically, at least.
Theoretically. It took them a long time, months, I think, of excavating through the basement area or the bottom of the cathedral, and they finally found these bones. And they had a forensic expert put them together. It was 3 people, not 1. Mm-hmm.
Well, it was the Holy Trinity of James.
There you go. The church has totally backed off on all this. You still find people along the way on the Camino that sort of half believe it or they want to believe it.
Yeah. Humans are very good at believing things if they really, really want them to be true.
Oh, absolutely. We came across this mother and we assumed it was her son, and her son was blind and she was leading him down the Camino, and you just had to assume that maybe they were hoping that getting to the bones, maybe it would heal him of his sight or something like that. So anyway, we got COVID just before we were to leave for Paris.
And you're going there because you have a lot of sins to absolve, right? That's why you've decided to go on this trek?
I've lived an awful life. Oh, a sinful life, I want to tell you.
Well, I don't know where the story goes, but hopefully you make it and get your absolution in the end.
As I said, we both got COVID, so
that was the devil trying to stop you.
That could be. Now, one of the things, there's sort of 2 thoughts about walking the Camino. One is the traditional way where every night you stay in what's called albergue, which is a hostel, which is the worst place to spend the night. You're in a room with bunk beds, maybe 20, 30 people snoring, making noise, all this sort of stuff. And so what we decided to do was we booked hotels in advance. Because we ended up having to postpone a week to get past the COVID, we ended up having to chuck that first week, which was 100 miles. So we started in Madrid. Well, we flew into Madrid and then took a couple trains and a taxi to Logroño and started there. And so we did 400 miles.
So that means 20% of your sins still remain with you.
Oh, at least. Absolutely. One of my big things was that I wanted to do a video of it for the Mr. Hall's Trail Guide and do a daily guide to the Camino. And so I'm shooting video all this time. I watched a lot of videos that people do of the Camino, and there's a lot of them out there. Every single one, they're always whining about how hard it is. Just, oh, my feet hurt. Oh, I have blisters. I'm so tired. This is such a hard thing to do. I think partly because we had conditioned and partly because we have mountains around here, so we're always hiking in mountains. It was no big deal.
Well, also, you come from a backpacking background and you did carry 70 pounds up ice through the PCT, and I've got to assume for this you were hiking with a day pack. You're not carrying many of the things you'd be carrying on a true backpacking trip.
Right, because we had a luggage service. We'd get to the hotel in the afternoon, all our stuff was there. Now, of Granted, I had all the camera gear with me, so my pack was probably about 30 pounds. So it was, a lot of the advice you see about hiking the Camino is they say, well, never take a pack any heavier than 20 pounds. I think that's absurd, but I think part of it is, again, the traditional idea is to pack light, not always just to have a light pack, but also to be always on the edge of, not having everything with you and, just depending on the Camino to provide to you. It turned out not to be that big of a deal. I mean, yeah, we were hiking anywhere between 12 and 18 miles a day. But one of the things that we started doing that I'd completely forgotten that I did this, but ever hear of this guy named Colin Fletcher? He was an outdoor writer. He's long gone. But he advised hike an hour and rest, hike an hour and rest. And we were watching all these other people, they would be hiking 3-4 hours at a time. We would hike an hour, stop maybe 10, 15 minutes and hike. It made all the difference. We would get into our town for the day, not refreshed, but I mean, we weren't like super tired or anything like that. We weren't worn. No, exactly. So we finally get to Santiago. I wasn't going to say it, but my wife turns to me and says, that wasn't that hard. And I'm glad you said that. I would be sounding like some boastful jerk or something like that by saying that.
A lot of it is hiking through towns and villages and things as well, right?
Yes. And most of these villages are like 1,000 years old.
Because in a certain degree, it's like a cultural hike more than it's an outdoors hike, right?
Exactly. You're walking along a lot of roads, dirt paths, not necessarily paved roads. But you go through these amazing old villages and, the architecture and all that is, it's been there for hundreds of years. It was really a beautiful walk. You do go through some really nice natural areas, but having hiked through like places like the Sierras, the Olympics, the Cascades, that sort of thing, it wasn't as tremendous in that regard. But certainly the cultural aspect of it has become an industry. It really has along the Camino. And so everybody in these villages, it's incumbent upon them to welcome you in. So I just never felt like anybody was looking at me like, oh God, there's another walker. Ugh.
I mean, a lot of people are depending on you and other people walking that for their income for the year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, a lot of these villages were about to just completely disappear. And then the Camino in the last, maybe 20 years or so, became really popular, and some of these villages were totally revitalized by it.
That is the power of a myth to save the culture and the pocketbooks of the local people.
We got there, and I wasn't really knowing what to expect. You walk through Santiago, you're going through the city for maybe 4 or 5 kilometers, and then you get to the old part of town, and you start to feel something. You start to feel this sense of accomplishment. And, it's like your skin is starting to tingle. The streets start getting narrower and narrower as they become more medieval. So many of the cities there, it was once walled off. So you have to go through the gate, and you get into this area where there's just these tall walls all around you. And then there's someone playing bagpipes.
Oh, nice.
It was sort of like their theme of, it used to be, maybe it still is, that when you run, do like a 10K or a marathon or something like that, they're playing something like the theme from Rocky or something like that. It was sort of like that. And it's like, and you start getting all built up, and then you walk through this gate, and there's this immense plaza and these people milling about, and then on your left-hand side is this cathedral that is just to beat everything you've ever seen before. My wife and I started crying. We're just overcome. I had enough wherewithal to set up my camera and shoot us as we're hugging in front of the cathedral. So I get the video of it. But that was almost like beside the point. We were just stood there hugging and just couldn't believe the feelings that came up. It had nothing to do with religion or anything like that. It was just that sense of accomplishment that we had walked basically day after day after day with no days off for like 30, 32 days, something like that. just straight through, and we did it. I can't tell you the emotions you feel.
This is actually quite nice because what I'm so used to hearing is I did this long hike and then we get to the end and it's a little anticlimactic and it's just over.
Yeah.
And then there's no one there to cheer you on. There's just the end and it's just done and no one there understands what you did and that's it. But this is a very different story where you arrive. It sounds like you actually got like a more emotional, transcendent experience than you anticipated.
It was, but I'm still trying to process it. You know, I mean, this was last October. I actually did a stand-up for, I'm going to do a documentary on the trip as well. And so I did, I shot a lot of stuff that I'm not putting in the day-by-day guide. But one of the things that I did was I did a stand-up about expectations. Doing something like this, or as you say, even just a backpacking trip. Too many times you leave at the trailhead with these expectations of what you're supposed to get out of this trip. My advice on this stand-up was leave them all behind. It sounds like a cliche, you know, one day at a time, but it's almost like one step at a time. You just do not try to funnel yourself into what you think it should be.
Right.
And just let it wash over you. I had to learn that the hard way because, as I say, we lost a week of the trip. And my expectation was to be going up and over the Pyrenees, which I really looked forward to. I had to throw out all my expectations. When I let my mind go blank and just enjoy every single moment, the trip became so much more special. And a lot of people expect when they get to Santiago that they are going to talk to God or, you know, have some sort of spiritual awakening or some epiphany about themselves. One of the things I said in this stand-up was sometimes the gifts that you get from travel only arrive at your door like 6 months after you came back home. You know, that you could be just sitting there eating your dinner and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I just had this realization of what I just got out of that trip. And it sometimes takes a while for, you know, everything to process. I try to do that now, that anytime I go on a trip, a hike or anything like that, I just let everything go and just let the experience just wash over me.
I think there are a lot of things there that are important. Like one, you're saying how you might come to realizations later and realize things later. I think what also happens sometimes is a big experience like that changes things in you that you're maybe not aware have changed until you're presented with some other situation later and you recognize, oh, I've handled this situation better than I would have in the past or differently than I would have in the past. And that might be 3 years down the line. Until you sit down and think about it, you're like, oh, that happened that way because of this experience 3 years prior. And I didn't realize why that was happening.
Right.
But also you're talking about like letting go of your expectations and then letting the trip occur as it occurs. And my wife and I were talking about something somewhat similarly last night, which is when some people travel, they go in and they have a hard time because what they do is recognize what's different than what their day-to-day life is like and harp on how the conveniences they are used to are not there, or the culture is different from their culture. And instead of recognizing, oh, this is an opportunity to see life from a different perspective, they harp on how it's different and then therefore makes them upset or angry or it's bad in some way. And what you're talking about with the expectations of the trip, I think there's the same thing there, which is, yes, things are going to be different and that's why you're there. And then leave yourselves open to having these different experiences instead of expecting to have the same experience you have outside of somewhere else. So yeah, I think there's a lot of great advice there about go on the trip and then let the trip tell you what your experience is instead of you trying to guide the experience of the trip.
Exactly. Well, and also, I mean, what you just said relates to what we were talking about earlier, that the Camino is also a cultural experience. I was still seeing people approach the Spaniards like they should know English.
Right.
And that they should be treated like something special because they're walking the Camino. And I always it's not like I speak Spanish that well, but instead of going up and saying, you know, I want a Coke, it was be Kyoto and cola zero, por favor. And I didn't say it very well, just like I didn't say it very well here. My wife is so much better at Spanish than I am, and I don't have the accent or anything like that. But you could tell that you were actually connecting with this person in a way that was, it was momentary and that sort of thing, but you were still connecting with this person. And you could see the looks on their face when someone would come up to them and just start ordering something in English, just assuming they spoke English. It was like, oh, God, just, all right, and leave me alone, almost that sort of feeling. Mm-hmm. And they were so much nicer to me.
I mean, at the very least, a person should learn how to say, do you speak English in the language of the country they're going to? Because then you've at least attempted.
Oh, yeah. I've always tried to go into different places, at least learning please, thank you, how to order a little bit of food or something like that, just because. Or where's the bathroom? One of the cliches about France is that French people are just rude. And I always found that if I first went up to someone and say, parlez-vous anglais? Mm-hmm. They would go, oui. And I'd go, oh, merci. Mm-hmm. And then start talking to them. They would respond so positively to me. So I never met a rude Frenchman.
I haven't spent a crazy amount of time, but I've spent a few weeks in France at different times. And same experience. Mm-hmm. I didn't find that French people were so rude. I think Americans that think French people are rude don't appreciate that maybe French people don't put up with their bullshit. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between I don't let you treat me like crap and I'm rude.
Right.
There's a big difference between those two things.
Yeah, exactly.
So how many days were you on the Camino?
I believe it was between 30 and 35. I'm not quite sure.
Okay, so over a month.
Over a month
walking through the Spanish countryside and the villages and the towns and then...
Oh, you want to hear something crazy? The Catholic Church, as far as I'm concerned, arbitrarily decided that if you walk at least the last 100 kilometers of the Camino, well, they don't talk about your sins being absolved anymore, but you get this certificate called a Compostela. I never really cared about the Compostela. I mean, I got one just because I figured, well, I'm here, I may as well get it. But you get to this town, actually it's a city called Sarria, and that's considered the jump-off point for the last 100 kilometers. And all of a sudden, it's just like crowds and crowds of people. I mean, hundreds of people all walking at the same time. They're all going for that Compostela, the last 100 kilometers, so they can say they walked the Camino. Well, it turns out, I think the statistic is around 80% of the people doing that are Spaniards. And the reason is, I found out, is that if you can put on your resume that you have a Compostela, you will actually be considered more valuable to the company than someone who hasn't gotten it. You can get a job easier. I mean, it's really seen as a big deal to get that.
So it proves that you can accomplish some sort of hardship.
Right. Yeah. But we're going 100 kilometers. That was nothing. That's 65 miles. Yeah. Come on, we did 400. Shouldn't we get something more? This lousy paper that looks not much better than a high school diploma. It's just like. So anyway, that's my last thing about the Camino right now.
But is it framed on your wall right now?
No, it isn't. It's sitting on my desk someplace under a bunch of papers. That's how valuable it was to me. It was that's the other thing. It was the experience that obviously was so much more valuable. But not just the experience for me. I think, a lot of people do the Camino by themselves. You see it more and more that women are doing it by themselves, which is really unusual. I mean, I remember not too many years ago when you would be backpacking and it would be really unusual to see a solo woman hiker. So I was just going to, a lot of people do it solo now.
Let's talk logistics for a bit because I've looked into it some and it's a bit confusing because there are so many different pathways you can take and different, like you were saying, you can start in France, some of them start in Spain. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to, does it even overlap Germany at some points?
No, but we did meet this one guy who was just like the most traditional. We were in this long 8-day section called La Meseta, which is basically walking through Missouri, flat farmland for 8 days straight. And we're on this road that is straight as an arrow for like 15 miles. We're resting, and we see this figure off in the distance. And he's all black and tall, and he's carrying a staff. And he's coming towards us, and I'm going, my gosh, he looks like death. Come to get us.
Right. Yeah.
And it turned out that it was this guy who had stepped out his front door in Switzerland and walked all the way from Switzerland to Santiago. And then, just like the medieval pilgrims, he turned around and he was walking back home.
All right. Well, he's doing it the right way. He doesn't care about his certificate either.
No. So that is the traditional way of doing it. Not many people do it that way. There is another 800 kilometers that starts in central France and then comes down and then meets the Camino Frances. It starts in a place called Le Puy. And then you can start in Portugal. I think there's some routes. There's some short routes that start near the northwest tip of Spain or something like that and come down. There's the Norte, which goes along the coast. Can't remember where you start, but it's a lot more rugged because you go up and down a lot through the mountains there. Those are the main ones.
So how did you do your research and decide which path you wanted to take?
The Frances is the most popular, and it was the idea of starting and going up and over the Pyrenees that was really the attraction. There is another route that's considered to be the absolute original route, but the Frances is more or less, it's considered one of the original routes. So we wanted to do that. It's also the longest, probably, of all of them. Maybe the Norte is a little bit longer. But it has the most services also along the way. Services meaning that you're always going through towns and things like that. Not long stretches in between places where you can stop to eat or something like that, get water.
And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch us up.
Oh my gosh.
And now we're going to jump through time again. I'm going to talk about how we initially met because, as you may recall, this was, I don't know at this point, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, something like this? In Death Valley with Scott Swaney?
2017, 2018, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
It was 2018, I believe.
Was it 2018?
Yeah.
All right, so then approximately 6 years ago at this point, since we're early 2024 right now.
The great Scott Swaney.
That's right. So why don't you tell us about what you were doing there and why you were there to follow Scott Swaney through Death Valley.
I've been canyoneering since around 2010, maybe, something like that. A friend of mine, Rich, and we had started climbing the 14,000-foot peaks in California. Now, Rich, being a lot more methodical than I am, he was looking up all the peaks that we had to climb. I would just, look up the beta on the next one we were going to go up, and he was looking at all of them. One of the things he saw that was on some of the peaks, like, say, North Palisade, it was recommended that instead of trying to climb down the peak, that you would rappel down the peak. And he thought, well, we really don't know how to do that. So he wanted to get some sort of class on how to rappel. And then he found this course in canyoneering. Well, obviously, canyoneering, you're rappelling all day long. So, you'll really get good at it. So we took this course. His wife went along. 2 other friends came with us. My wife was going to do it, but she hurt her foot. So it was 5 of us. We took this course. The very first rappel was down a 90-foot waterfall in Rubio Canyon.
Was this with ATS?
Yes, it was ATS.
Your getting into canyoneering story is pretty much the same as mine.
Oh, really?
Except the second time I went with them, they took us to Rubio. The first time they had taken us to San Antonio Falls.
Oh,
well, yeah, around the same time period.
Oh, San Antonio Falls is nothing compared to this sucker. And the thing is as you know, since you've done it.
You're talking about Thalehaha Falls in Rubio Canyon.
I have never been able to remember that name. I always have to look it up. Yes, because you get into the bottom of the canyon and then you climb up this, used trail. And you get to a certain point where you can look down and see the falls. Mm-hmm. And they go, oh, yeah, that's your first rappel. And I wanted to turn around. And it was the scariest thing because part about that falls is that it is all the moss and whatnot.
Yeah,
it's slick as snot. Mm-hmm. It's just and I didn't have shoes for that. I just had my hiking boots. So I'm getting slammed into the rocks the whole way down. We took this course and we learned, and then the 5 of us started doing canyons in the local mountains here in the San Gabriels. And then Rich got the idea that he'd been reading around and reading about all the wonderful canyons in Death Valley, which are incredible. They're just big ass canyons.
Yeah.
They're wonderful.
Falls is nothing compared.
No,
Yeah.
nothing like that. So we started doing that. And then Rich starts talking about how he would like to do a first descent someday. And he'd been reading up on how people do first descents and all that sort of stuff, and how difficult it can be, and the research you have to do into it. And it can be very risky, even more risky than, an established canyon. Yeah, he'd been hearing about this guy named Scott Swaney. Being a magazine writer, I thought, well, maybe there's a story there. So I looked him up. I asked him if it would, maybe I could go on one of his first descents. And he had one coming up, and that's the one where we met in the mountains outside of Death Valley. And Scott is the most incredible character I've ever read. He
always refer to him as the Chuck Norris of canyoneering.
Well, he has no filters when it comes to storytelling. And we're going out the first morning, it's like 4:35 in the morning, pitch black. And he's running commentary about all the people he has seen or heard of who have died, canyoneering or mountain climbing. And I'm thinking, this isn't the time to talk about that. So, yeah, those were my only 2 first descents. I'm glad I did it. I don't feel an urge to do any more. I'm glad we did it. And so what we have been doing is we've been going back over his portfolio of canyons that he's done in Death Valley, which are hundreds, picking some that have only been lightly done, or maybe not at all, since he's done them.
Most of them have not been done since he's done them.
That's what I understand. Yeah. We did a couple last November called Sentinel and Funky Lizard up in the Panamint Mountains. And we had to rebuild all the anchors because they looked like the original anchors that Scott left.
You should in Death Valley anyway, because the environment destroys everything.
Oh, yeah. If nothing else, we always check them and then back them up. Because we heard about, it was a ranger in Death Valley. I can't remember which canyon, but they didn't back up the cairn anchor. A cairn anchor being one where you bury a stone and and the anchor is under there, and then you pile it top of rocks.
Yeah, a dead man, yeah.
Yeah, I've never heard of that called that. Okay. She went over, and the cairn anchor exploded, and she fell maybe 20, 30, 40 feet, something like that. She survived, obviously. But, it was just like, that was our message, that we always back up our anchors no matter what.
There was an issue a few years ago also where someone had gone down and inspected the webbing. It looked good, and then the webbing gave way. And it was just because of the UV and the heat just was wearing it down, and visibly it looked fine.
Yeah. And I think I got a little cocky because during the ATS course, one of the things he did was he put someone on a rope, and the person there was another rope attached to his harness. So, this wasn't like he was about to die or something like that. But then he took the webbing and slowly started cutting into it. And it wasn't until there was one strand left on the webbing before it gave way. I saw that and I thought, well, this stuff is indestructible. And it isn't. You're right. If it's exposed to a season or two in Death Valley, it is going to come apart.
The thing with Death Valley is there are very few things that exist on Earth that can survive the climate of Death Valley.
True.
And one of those things is Scott Swaney.
Right. I am not going to say where it is, although I guess you could look it up, but one of the best canyons that he did that no one seems to do is it's one filled with fossils, and it is the most amazing place. You start off and you're walking, and it's mostly level for about 4 miles, and then all of a sudden you start looking at rocks and there's fossils on the rocks, and then you start climbing up and you get to the top of the canyon, and then there's these long slabs of fossilized snails, slabs of them. It's like, what an interior decorator might do just for, to do something different. And these fossils, I think, are like 600 million years old. And to think that the reason they're there is because those mountains didn't used to exist. That was the ocean floor.
Right.
I am forever grateful for Scott to have found this canyon, and it was so important to him to share it with other people.
Yeah, he's very good about documenting all of these, and he sincerely, you said hundreds, it sincerely is 200-300 canyons at this point that he has documented in Death Valley. And it's all available on RopeWiki on the internet for anyone to go search and find and get that beta. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember as we're walking from the first canyon we did, there was this long discussion about what do we call the canyon? And I never even thought about that. But, I mean, you were coming up with like mythological, gods or something like that.
I know one of them ended up being Atlas.
He called it Atlas, yes. I think it was the second or third rappel was 360 feet. That still remains the longest rappel I've ever done. It was windy at the top. I mean, really windy. And because it was a Cairn anchor, you had to start low, which is even, more clumsy in a way. It's very awkward to start. And I kept thinking, I got 360 feet of air under me. This is amazing. I've never done such a long rappel. And after a while, I started thinking, this is just going on forever. I'm getting tired.
The thing, too, is it gets faster. The closer you get to the ground, as you lose the friction of the weight underneath you.
Well, that's one of the things that made it clumsy at the start was I put on an extra horn on my rappel device. So that, I started out like you almost have to push the rope through your rappel device. And then, once you get about halfway, all of a sudden, zit. In fact, the first canyon we ever did in Death Valley was called Coffin Canyon. And there's a close to 200-foot rappel. I think it's the second one. It's the only place in Death Valley where it's a bolted anchor. So we didn't know from friction in the sense of, really long rappels. We had never done anything like that. So we didn't put on, any extra friction on the rappel device. I remember Rich went down, and towards the bottom of the rappel, it becomes a free rappel where you're just dangling and you're just zzz. He almost lost control of his rappel device because he was going so fast.
Yeah, and that's a real danger with those long
Oh,
wraps.
absolutely. So I and this other guy are standing at the top, and we hear him just screaming. It was from joy of staying alive. Yeah, that was the first time we had ever done a rappel that long. And so we learned two things from that we have to wear gloves, because when you're on that long of a rappel, your rappel device becomes incredibly hot.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you can really singe your skin. I mean, just lose skin.
I've burnt myself getting off, and then just it bangs me in the wrist or something, and then you're like, oh, shit, yeah.
And then also, they use Critter rappel devices, and I'm tempted to get one because you can, in mid-rappel,
what have you
add
been using?
friction.
What have you been using prior?
To ATS.
Oh, the ATS. You should be able to do that on that one as well. But yeah, I transitioned over to the Critter years ago, and
really?
It's super useful for adding and removing friction while you're rappelling.
I don't know why I like it so much. But it's starting.
Are you saying ATC or ATS?
ATS.
Okay, because the ATS should have a variety of horns and things on it as well, right? Yeah.
But when you're in mid-rappel and you got all that tension on the rope, there's no way that you can loop the rope over a horn in order to add more friction. So it is a little scary that way. I always err on the side of caution.
Yeah, pick up the Critter. Tom Jones sells them now through Imlay Canyon Gear and various other ways you can get them. So yeah.
Well, I'm almost through my second copy of the ATS. I mean, they wear down after a while.
Oh, for sure they do.
Yeah. It's amazing.
So you were on that trip to interview and write a story about Scott Sweaty.
And I pitched it around and no one was interested.
Really?
Yeah. I had pitched it to Outside Magazine, and just a couple of weeks later, someone had published on their website a profile of Scott. So someone had got in there before
Somebody
me.
beat you to it.
Oh, that is the story of my life when it comes to magazine writing.
Let's talk a bit about that. Let's talk about the magazine writer portion of your life. How did that come about, and what did that look like?
I started out as a video photographer for television news, but I've always loved writing. I started out learning how to do documentaries and shooting video and that sort of thing at Washington State University. I got a job at their PBS station, and I was shooting documentaries. And so I was able to parlay that into at least getting a job up in Anchorage. Getting a job in the television news business is really hard. And so it makes more sense sometimes to start presenting yourself to the smaller markets. And Anchorage became sort of like a last resort. And I got the job. So this was back in late 1980. I think it was just that I wanted to write and not just shoot video. So I went to the news director and said, would you mind if I do some stories? And he was all for it because, it's sort of like he had two positions in one body. Right. And I started learning how to do interviews and how to write copy and that sort of thing. And eventually started getting on camera. Funny thing there, December. So I'd been working there maybe 3 or 4 months. And the very first time that I was on TV, I get home, I get this phone call from this woman. And she starts asking me questions about my father. And I would answer politely, and then I would say, well, who are you? And she would just ask another question about my father. And finally she said, Bill, I'm your sister. I'm like, what? It was my half-sister. Now, not to air out the dirty laundry, but apparently my father, I knew that my father had been married before he met my mother, and he had 2 daughters. For reasons that have never really been fully explained to me, he really stopped communicating with them after a while, and they felt abandoned. So anyway, this sister, Ginny, had moved to Anchorage probably just after it became a state. She had been searching for my father for like 10, 15 years, trying to find him. Every time she went into an airport in the lower 48, the first thing she would do is break open a phone book at a payphone and look up his name and try to find it, and she never would find it. All of a sudden, she just happened to get home from work early, turned on the TV. She normally didn't watch the channel that I was on.
The first time you appeared.
First time I was on TV. She just happened to hear, and Bill Sharpsteen reports, and there I was. That was kind of a cool thing to happen.
Yeah, what a weird confluence of circumstance.
Oh, absolutely. So anyway, getting back to my career, I started becoming better and better. I was never that good on air. So I started getting more and more interested in doing documentaries. And then a job came up in this place called Bethel, Alaska, which is out in western Alaska. The only dependable way to get there is by airplane. There's no roads out to that part of the state. In fact, there's very few roads in Alaska to begin with.
Yeah. When you compare the whole state size to what's inhabited. Yeah.
And Bethel was the center of commerce, government, business, and all that sort of stuff for what was known as the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. There was like 56 native Alaskan villages that surrounded Bethel. So I got a job doing documentaries there for the PBS station. And so I was traveling all around and doing documentaries about Alaska natives. And it was a wonderful job. I had a 1-year contract and just decided that I just didn't want to live in Alaska anymore. Can I tell you a quick, hopefully not too quick of a story.
You are welcome to tell whatever story you feel the urge to tell.
Because in Bethel, I became reputedly the only person ever in the history of sled dogs to have been attacked by an entire sled dog team. You're looking at history right here. The thing about Bethel is, there was no outdoor recreation per se unless you were a hunter or a fisher, and I just was neither. I've run ever since I was, in my early 20s. Run, weight lift, all the, and along with hiking and that sort of stuff. Most of the roads in Bethel were gravel, which is fine for running. And during the winter, they're covered by this really hard-packed snow. It becomes crystalline. Out on the tundra, you're surrounded by tundra, and tundra is just this gentle, rolling, flat ground. And in the winter, there would be snowmobile trails that would go off from Bethel to some of the closer villages, and that's how people from the villages would get into Bethel. Some of them, if they had cars, might actually drive down the Kuskokwim River. You could do that during the winter.
Frozen over.
Oh, yeah. It's spooky as hell. But,
I would assume.
Oh, yeah. But anyway, so I discovered these snowmobile trails were wonderful for running because it was hard-packed snow. It was like running over beach sand that was really hard-packed. And the other element about tundra is that there are a bazillion ponds. And of course, they're all frozen over during the winter. And on the snowmobile trails, the snowmobiles would go over the ice and it would get all roughed up. So you could run across this ice without slipping. So one day, I think I was going to be doing some editing at night. And so I took the afternoon off. And it was a gorgeous day. It was maybe 15 degrees. And I got dressed up and I decided to go for a run in the afternoon. So we lived, 2 roommates and I lived in this mobile home that I swear had to have come from Florida. It was not made for Arctic weather at all. It was horrible. I get out of the trailer and I run down the road about half mile and I come to where the snowmobile trail attached to the road. Just as I got to that intersection, I saw this musher hitching up his sled dog team. And he had 7 dogs. So, they're hitched up 2 by 2 by 2, and then the lead dog is on a long...
Rudolph.
Yeah, he's on a long lead in front. So I just kind of waved to him, and I started down the trail, and I just thought, well, I just need to listen for them coming up because a sled dog team is going like 30 miles an hour.
They're going to go a lot faster than you.
You don't want to get run over by those guys. So I don't know, maybe I was running 15, 20 minutes and I heard them coming up behind me. So I pull off the trail about 5 feet. Now, the thing about sled dogs is they are so easily spooked. They're like thoroughbred horses. All you have to do is look at them the wrong way and they'll get all, kinky. I step off the trail thinking 5 feet's enough. They're not going to get, look at me and get all weirded out. And I expected him to just blast by. Well, the lead dog veered off the trail, runs behind me, while the other 6 dogs stay on the trail. Now remember, they're all attached by a line, and I see this yellow rope whipping at my knees. I don't know how I did it, but I had the reaction time to, like a cat, to just jump up.
I was going to say, was this like the most dangerous jump rope you've ever done?
Oh, man, no kidding. I mean, who knows? I would have been kneecapped or something. But anyway, so the rope just managed to right under my feet. The musher stops, and he has this big hook that he puts into the snow so that the dogs can't, take the sled dog off without him.
So some sort of anchor.
Yeah, an anchor. And he's gathering up the dogs and trying to get them rearranged on the trail. But because it's 15 degrees, I'm not going to stand there waiting for him to get this done. So I decided, I said, I'm going to take off. I ran down the trail. A few minutes later, they come back. And this time I go, well, okay, I'll be smart.
I'm going to get 50 feet off.
I got 10 feet off. I thought, no problem, 10 feet. This time, the lead dog veers off the trail, jumps up, and bites me in the stomach. Teeth right through my clothes and leaves a big cut in my stomach. That's a real painful cut.
Yeah.
And I'm just shocked. And then a second later, I look down and all 7 dogs are bunched up right in front of me with these zombie eyes. And they're just looking up at me. They're just like, what? And I'm going, oh my gosh, I am in such trouble. The musher is yelling at them and they're just totally ignoring him. So I thought, well, you don't want to run in a situation like that. So I figured if I step back enough, I'll get out from the length of their tow rope. So I take 1 step backwards. They all took 1 step forward with these glazed eyes. And I go, oh, this is too weird. And I take another step back, and they all took a step forward. And that second step, I noticed how the ground was starting to slope behind me, downward. And I realized there must be a pond behind me if that's what's happening. And I look over and I got ice right behind me. And I think if I take another step onto that ice, I'm bound to slip. But I figured I got to do something. I took another step, slipped on my back, and all 7 dogs descended on me. They went behind my head, so I couldn't see them, but they were lunging at my neck like they were literally going for the jugular. I'm swinging my fists back behind my head just blindly, and I remember hitting a couple snouts and thinking, well, maybe that's going to discourage them. And the lead dog sneaked around, grabbed a hold of my calf, and just ripped a hole in my calf. So I took my right foot and kicked him in the head. And finally, the musher realized that calling out these dogs was going to do no good. And he grabbed a hold of the lead dog. And the minute he did that, the others just totally pacified. I'm scrambled backwards on the ice, and I look over, and it's like blood on the ice. And I'm going, oh my God, that must be me. And he took the lead dog, and he's smashing its head on the ice and swearing and cussing. This is just like a surreal moment for me. The musher started talking to me like it was my fault. Blame the victim. But fortunately, he said, well, I'll cover your medical bills. And
you were like, yes, you will.
So So he gave me his name. I ran back home and got to a clinic. In Bethel, there's kind of like 2 tiers of medical facility. There's the hospital, which is only for Alaska Natives. And then there's clinics for the rest of us. So I went to a clinic, and I got a long lecture on rabies and what to look, all this sort of stuff, and I got a tetanus shot, and I became the talk of the town. I mean, I actually had people asking me to roll up my pant leg so they could see the dog bite.
Hey, this is something you and Scott Swaney have in common. He was walking a trail like a year or so ago, and somebody's dog attacked his calf.
Yeah. He's also the man who goes after rattlesnakes.
Yeah, but dogs are what he needs to worry about, apparently.
Apparently. So anyway, that's my big story there.
So while you're working in news in Alaska, you periodically get attacked by dog sleds.
Yeah. It was, and I also went skydiving. I got chased by a moose. I mean, it was a great experience. And
how many years were you in Alaska?
3.5. Yeah. So I came back.
Because you didn't want to be killed.
Yes. Well, strangely enough, when I came, I would still go running, of course, every night. And if a dog barked, I would jump in the air. It took 2 years to get over that sort of lasting trauma. Now I'm okay. But I mean, back then, it just scared me to death to be around dogs. So I came down to Los Angeles. Actually, what happened was I was living up in the Seattle area, a place called Bellevue, working at a photo finishing lab. Just trying to get a job back in TV. I had sent my resume tape to this place in Alabama. And I'm thinking, I don't want to live in Alabama. And I called them up after the follow-up, and they said, well, we're still looking. The minute I hung up the phone, this voice in my head said, time to move to Los Angeles, which is something I had never wanted to do in my life. And this is something that I really feel is true, is you need to listen to your inner voice sometimes, all the time. If you ever ignore your inner voice, that's when you get into trouble. I just packed up, moved to Los Angeles. I think I had this fatuous notion that I could, with my documentary experience, I could somehow parlay it into film production or something like that. What I discovered, at least seemed to me, that the only open positions in film productions were for lawyers and accountants. I got to know this one film production guy. He owned a company, and he just said, you just got too much experience. I said, I'll be willing to start as a production assistant. And he said, no. I worked in a photo finishing lab. That's how I put myself through school, was working, printing color. And this woman started coming into the shop. It was a 1-hour lab, and she was a sculptor. And at the time, she sculpted mannequins, the very mannequins that you see, in stores. And she would make them out of clay, life size, and then she would photograph them before they went to get fired and turned into molds. So we got to talking about that, and I thought, well, that's a great story. So I pitched it to Los Angeles Magazine. They assigned the piece. The piece came out, and I started working for them.
So did they assign you as the writer and the photographer for that piece? Okay.
No. I offered, and they had a policy. In fact, a lot of magazines, bigger magazines, have a policy of the writer doesn't. Well, back then, at least they did. They just didn't want to have you do the same thing.
Yeah, I would have been surprised if they would have allowed you to do both.
Right.
Yeah.
I started writing for them, and then I was able to, then when I pitched a story to another magazine, I could say, well, I'm writing for Los Angeles Magazine. So I started writing for a lot of different magazines, wrote for Los Angeles Times Magazine. In fact, 2 articles, one for Los Angeles Magazine and one for LA Times Magazine, ended up becoming books. So that worked out rather well. Interestingly enough, this woman, her name was Tanya Regier, she just died, unfortunately. She became an art sculptor. She gave up the mannequin thing. But what happened was this article was seen by a producer at CBS News, and they did a story about her, and she just instantly became famous. That got her career going in a whole other direction. This one article, it's amazing. Just one stupid little article just had all this effect on two people.
And it's funny how those things happen, right? Because you can never guess when that's going to be the case. You could write 5,000 articles and nothing ever occur.
Yeah.
And then one day will be the one that changes everything.
Exactly, yeah. One of the books was called Dirty Water, and it was about this school teacher who owned a house on Playa del Rey Beach. He never told me how he could afford a house on the beach. I don't know. Every morning, he would get up before he went to school, and he'd go swimming in the ocean, get past the surf, swim maybe a half mile, a mile, depending on how much time he had, come back, wash off, and then go to school. Through all sorts of weird circumstances, he learned that Santa Monica Bay, where he was swimming, was considered one of the most polluted bodies of water in the world. And the reason for that was the city of Los Angeles was dumping partially treated sewage into the bay out of a Hyperion sewage treatment plant. He got really upset about that he was swimming in polluted water, and he decided to do something about it. And in 9 months, he was basically the force behind Los Angeles being forced by the EPA to upgrade Hyperion treatment plant. And I can't remember, it was something like $2 or $3, $4 billion had to be spent to upgrade this plant, and it was all because of this guy named Howard Bennett. So I told the story about that. Through him, I met this woman who was a woman longshoreman at the Port of Los Angeles. And I did a story about her for Los Angeles Times magazine. That became a book called The Docks. Each chapter is a separate story of a different person that works there. So like the first chapter is about a port pilot. And port pilots all through the world, ship captains are not allowed to pilot their ships into a port. They have to have a port pilot come out to the ship and direct it in. They have to go out in a small boat. The people in the ship drop down what's called a Jacob's ladder, which is a rope ladder. They scurry up the ladder and then get on board and then take the ship in. I followed him out to the ship. It was this 900-foot cargo ship, which even then wasn't considered to be a big ship. 900 feet.
Right.
Just amazing.
Yeah.
So it isn't until I'm out on the boat and just about ready to climb up the ladder. They hung it out probably an hour before we got there.
And how high is the deck above the surface of the water?
You go through a little porthole, so it's maybe 30 feet above the sea.
Okay, so it's one of those lower Okay,
yeah.
Got you.
The rope had been hanging out there for about an hour. Plenty of time to get soaking wet. And then I find out, just as we get there, oh yeah, this is the one thing that kills port pilots more than anything else. Because if they slip off the ladder, they'll get crushed between the two vessels. And I'm going, oh, well, thanks for telling me. Because I remember back in the port pilot office, people are going, wow, you're going to do that? That's really brave of you. And I'm thinking, well, what's the big deal? So yeah, I got up the ladder and then we went in. And what was interesting about that particular trip was just as we got into the port, the ship's engines stopped working. And we're adrift in the port. And I mean, this ship could have easily had, turned or something like that and started taking out piers or something like that.
Things, yeah.
Well, the thing is the port pilot got cocky. There wasn't much of a breeze that day, so he only ordered one tugboat. And one tugboat isn't enough to control a 900-foot cargo ship. So anyway, it made a good story. I talked to longshoremen, the executive director of the port, all these different people. I went out with a Coast Guard. I really enjoyed writing that book. So those were both published by University of California Press. And so now I'm working on my third book, which is the memoir.
So the first two books, are they still available?
They are. You can find them on Amazon.
And then tell us about this third one that you're working on.
It started out as just a simple story about building this house. We bought the land in 2014, and it took 7 years to build, 3.5 years just to get through the paperwork. As early back as I can remember, I was 6 years old. I sneaked out of the house and started walking around the neighborhood in San Luis Obispo. We were there while my father was getting an engineering degree at Cal Poly. I came across this house that was under construction, and it didn't look like anybody was there. Stupid me. I thought, I'll just walk into the house. I want to explore it. This is kind of cool. And this guy came out. He was very friendly, and he was telling me that he was building the house himself. There was something so fascinating about, for me, to see a house where where the walls were just the studs, the bare studs, and to see inside the secret world of a house.
Right, the secret skeleton.
Exactly. Yeah. To have him say, oh yeah, I'm building this myself. first of all, I thought, well, then one person can build his own house. And I got into my head, back then, I wanted to build my own house. And I held on to this all these years. And then finally, in my 60s, circumstances came to be where I was able to, along with my wife, buy the land. We designed the house ourselves and start building it. And I wanted to build it with materials that made a lot more sense to me than wood studs. So we built this out of what are known as insulated concrete forms, which are basically these foam blocks that fit together like Legos. And they have this plastic ribbing inside that you clip in the rebar, the reinforced steel bars. Mm-hmm. And then once you put it together and it's braced, you pour concrete in the middle of the blocks, and that's it. You walk away. The house is incredibly insulated. During the summer, if it's 100 degrees outside, it's at least 30 degrees cooler inside here. As you notice, we don't have the heat on. It's pretty comfortable. More or less insect-proof. They're definitely fireproof.
Which is extremely important based on where you are right now.
We're in a high fire hazard area. I'm told that during an earthquake, a wood frame house will shake back and forth. An ICF house will just ride the waves like a boat. We haven't had any kind of big earthquake since we built it, but it's supposed to be really structurally sound when it comes to an earthquake. It's a wonderful house, and it's really quiet. We have neighbors complaining about someone riding up and down the street in a motorcycle. We never hear it. What attracted me to the ICF, besides all the practical things, was that I could build it myself. One person can build all the outside walls all by himself. It wasn't that hard. I just went from there. I did all the wiring myself, all the plumbing. I did the shingling, the drywall, plastering, the stucco, put in the windows. The bigger ones I had some help with. The only time I had a really big crew was I decided to get the roof trusses pre-manufactured. This is called the Great Room. It's a combination living room, dining room, kitchen, and TV room, reading room, all in one. So, it's like 900 square feet. The roof trusses over this are 40 feet long. And so I had them pre-manufactured. They come in on a big flatbed truck, and they have to be craned in. In a smaller house, some people will build the roof structure in place, but it just didn't seem to be a practical thing to do.
And lifting 40-foot long trusses as an individual would be a terrible.
No.
It would be completely impossible task.
It was. You should have seen this place. Obviously there was no roof at the time. Mm-hmm. So they crane them in, and they just they're stacked, leaning up against each other like dominoes that have fell over. And then the crew comes, and they just tightrope along the top of the wall, and then just pick them up, put them in place. One guy's on one side and one guy's on the other side of the house. It took this crew a couple days, which even if I had thought that after they were craned in, I could have done it myself, it would have taken me weeks. Anyway, did have to have a crew for that. Every time there was concrete, I'd have to have a few people come in and help me out. This house had something like 80 loads of concrete. The walls took up 70 yards just by himself. Oh, maybe more. No, it was probably 150 now that I think about it. And that's the only part of this construction that I feel like I was being self-deceptive about doing things the environmental way, because concrete requires a ton of electricity in order to make it. And so in that way, it's environmentally wasteful, but it's a strong house.
Apparently it turns into a boat during earthquakes.
It floats off.
Yeah, which might be very useful if you get any terrible flash floods in the area. So you say that you are writing currently a book about that experience?
Well, yes, that's right. I got off on a tangent, which you said was okay.
Yeah, that's what this show's for.
My first draft was all about the process and all the stuff that we went through. We went through a lot. I have some friends, we're all published writers, and we each critique each other's work. And one of the things they kept saying is, it's not personal enough. It's not personal enough. And I realized they're absolutely right. So my second draft is where only the core of the book is still about building the house, but that's like 20% of it. And what I started doing is going back through my life and pulling all the pieces that came into my life that made me who I am, that turned me into someone who would want to build a house. It is an incredibly complex thing to do. even if I had hired a contractor, it still would have been a complex thing to do. But to do it by myself was just, I still can't believe I had the wherewithal to get it done. Just getting through the paperwork process with the county and getting all the permits and all that sort of stuff. As I say, it took 3.5 years. And one of the complications was that there's no municipal water here. So we had to dig a well. We did not know that when we bought the property because we had looked at a house across the street. We were thinking, well, we'll just remodel that house. And it had water tanks. And we asked about that. And they said, oh, yeah, there's no water. They just have the water trucked in. And we thought, well, we could do that. Well, then we learned after we bought the property that the county in 2004 had outlawed trucked in water for new construction, that we had to dig a well. And digging a well is really a lot of work. I personally did not do it. The state of California has this thing where you're termed an owner-builder, which means that you are allowed to build a house by yourself with one exception, and that's digging a well. You can do everything else. So, a lot of people ask me, what, you didn't need to be a licensed contractor or, you don't need to be a licensed electrician or anything like that. No, you can do it all yourself, as much or as little as you want. The only stipulation is you sign these papers all the time saying that you will not sell the house for 2 years. Other than that, so it was just a really long process.
And so when do you think this book will be complete and available?
80% done. Probably what I really need to do is start pitching it to agents. Even if I sold it to a publisher tomorrow, it probably wouldn't be out for another couple of years.
Right.
But that's the plan.
So people should be on the lookout in a few years.
Yes, I call the working title is The Building Code, and that's a double meaning. The building code being the one that got inside me, and then the one that the law. But it's a very personal story. And my writing friends have gone, oh yeah, you bled all over the keyboard, Bill. Good for you.
So now what we should do is we should transition to your current project, which is Mr. Hall's Trail Guide.
Yes.
And so you should tell us a little bit about what that is and why.
It is a trail guide. So in other words, I will go out to a particular trail and come back with a video and describe what you need to do to get from point A to point B on this trail. It's obviously a video guide like guidebook would be. It's just basically the same thing. I will research the trail before I even get to the trailhead, and I'll write stand-ups about, maybe the history, the natural history, whatever I can find about just to give the people something a little bit more.
Yeah, I've watched a number of these, and yeah, I can vouch that you provide a lot of information about each of these trails, even some of the smaller trails that maybe you would think there isn't a whole lot of a backstory or a history to.
Right. I just think that adds a little extra something to it. Along with saying, okay, you need to turn right here, you need to turn left here, and this is how far you go, and blah, 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 blah. That's always been the intention. Because I used to shoot and direct and edit documentaries, I've tried to make it, hopefully not too boastful here, as professional as I can make it. I'm starting to feel like there's so much out there that is done by people that just sort of throw it together. I really want to do something special. And I'm slowly building up the subscribers. Most of the videos are 7 to 8 minutes long, so they're really quick. They're cut together really quick. I don't have a lot of long segments or anything like that. I just feel like it's a well-made product. This all came about because when I was building the house, if I had to learn how to do something, say I was learning how to do the wiring, I went to YouTube.
Every single human being I have talked to who is doing anything, but especially home building or home remodeling or anything, in the last decade, every single person has told me that exact phrase. Well, where'd you learn to do this? YouTube.
Exactly. So I would study all these videos, try to pick out the ones that it sounded like the person knew what they were doing. But what started to get to me was the really amateurish quality of most of them. And I kept feeling like I could do better than this. But I didn't want to do videos about building a house because I didn't really feel like I was qualified. I built a 3,000 square foot house, but I'm not a contractor, and I feel like I would be faking my way through it if I was trying to do videos about something like that.
Right. Plus, you can only talk about your singular experience instead of how it may your multiple experiences in different circumstances. Right.
Well, as a matter of fact, now that you mentioned that just really quickly, one of the distinctions I've discovered between myself and a professional is that they have done it so many times that they know how to fix something if something is unusual.
Right.
They already have it back in their mind. Oh, yeah, that's how I dealt with it this time.
And this didn't work, and this didn't work, and this didn't work, and this kind of works, but we found out this works
Right,
better.
exactly. Right. And so sometimes I'd end up having to noodle about it for days before I could figure out exactly how to solve a particular problem, as opposed to someone who could just grab it out in 2 seconds. So I didn't want to do that. I thought to myself, well, what could I do? Oh, I really enjoy hiking. Wouldn't it be cool if I had to go out hiking every week?
Yeah, it gives you a great excuse to go outside and do something.
Oh, yeah. It's giving me an excuse to go places that I wouldn't necessarily do, like the Camino. I mean, that was more of a personal thing, but I mean, I never would have thought to, shoot the video of it. In a couple of months, we're doing the Trans-Catalina Trail. The month after that, Lost Coast Trail. Trying to get permits for the Wonderland Trail, which is, the one that circumnavigates Mount Rainier. All these things that I might not be inspired to do necessarily, but now I have a reason to do them. I love the idea of sharing this with other people. I think that's, the really big thing for me is there's something about the idea that you produce this video and then hundreds, if not thousands of people see it and they get something out of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe they get inspired to go do the trail themselves. And that to me is really special. It's a project that, I've been doing it for about a year now, a little bit more than a year. I've got almost 110 videos. So I've been cranking them out.
Yeah, that's a substantial amount.
Yeah. And as I say, the subscriber base is slowly, not as fast as maybe I would like, but the subscriber base is growing and growing and growing, and I'm getting the views. I'm happy.
Let's talk about that, because great thing about YouTube is anyone can use it, anyone can watch, anyone can create on it. But because of that, it can be very hard to get people to see your videos at all. So it can be very frustrating to spend all this time building these things and then not having the viewership. How has that process been to you? I know the subscriber base has been growing. And I think like with anything, right, there's a point where that can potentially grow exponentially.
It can.
Right.
Yes.
And so how has that growing process been for you?
One of the things I've learned is not to worry about it. I always feel like, okay, I'm producing a good product. Sooner or later, people are going to see it. I'm not bothered by it. I guess that's it. I just figure, don't sweat it. You're doing something good. You're doing something that's professional. Sooner or later, people are going to be catching on to it. And that's what's happening. People are starting to catch on to it. That's fine with me. I'm not going to lose any sleep over the fact that maybe this week I didn't get as many new subscribers as I wished or something like that. Mm-hmm. It used to be that I would put out a video and 3 days later there'd be 10 views.
Right.
I'm going, oh my God, I'm a failure. Oh no. And then those same videos, I'll look back on them and someone told me, oh yeah, they got 1,000 views now. So it's a gradual process, and I'm happy with that.
Did you attempt to incorporate any sort of strategies, or did you say, I'll make it and let it speak for itself?
There aren't a lot of strategies when it comes to YouTube. There are things like the thumbnails. I've been experimenting with the thumbnails, and so like the videos that I've been doing about the Camino, I'll see which thumbnails seem to get more viewers right up front than others, and so I've been incorporating that into it. That's a big thing. A lot of times it's the title of the video that grabs people, although I've resisted the clickbait ones, like you'd be surprised what you'll find out about this.
Only 1% of people can finish this trail.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, that's a great one. Oh, hey, something? I'll have to remember that.
Yeah. One of the most frustrating things to me on the internet these days is every time I see a list that most dangerous hikes in America, and it's like, oh, another one of these. Let me just go because I know Angels Landing and Half Dome are going to be on here somewhere, and they're going to exaggerate the dangers of it. Yep, there we go, number 3 and number 8 on this list. All right, yeah. And then now there are people online who, if someone posts an image or a video of themselves on those trails or with a kid or something, people freak out and they're like, you're taking a kid on this super dangerous trail.
Oh, yeah.
Clickbait does a lot of disservice to the community.
Speaking Speaking of Angel's Landing, I must have done that like 3 or 4 times. Yeah, there's a lot of air around you on certain places, but it never felt dangerous.
As a climber, I spend a lot of time on things far thinner without the protections than Angel's Landing. Also, the unfortunate thing with Angel's Landing is the chains are placed where it's convenient to place chains, not where humans should be walking on the rocks. When I've hiked Angel's Landing, I don't touch those chains because they're in less than ideal places for you to walk on the rocks.
Right.
So I think if you're scared and you're up there and you're uncomfortable and you're not used to that environment and you're hanging on those chains, yes, it probably seems way more dangerous and difficult than it actually is.
I'd rather go canyoneering in Zion. The canyons in Zion are amazing. We did this thing called Pine Creek Canyon. Ever hear of it?
Yep, I've done Pine Creek a couple
you
of
have?
times.
Isn't that the most beautiful canyon in the world? To me, it is. I just thought it was amazing.
The nice thing about it, too, is it is like 10 steps off the road.
Exactly.
The approach is practically non-existent for it.
Oh, yeah. We did one called Telephone Canyon where you walk by Walter's Wiggles and all that. Or maybe you do Walter's Wiggles. But anyway, the first rappel was a 200-footer with half of it, maybe more than half of it, was a free rappel. I don't know what it was about that rappel. I was whining like a little girl.
Telephone's a little interesting, too, because the last half of it is fairly unique because it sort of slots up, but then it's at an angle. And so you're kind of making your way down at an angle instead of what typically happens, which is you walk through a flat slot or a flat canyon, and then there's a drop. There were a lot of angled drops and angled walkways, which kind of makes it unique.
Part of me wants to do it again to demonstrate to my friends that I'm not a little girl all the time. It was the only time I have ever been scared to death, and I just do not understand what it was about that rappel.
Interesting. So the entry drop to Telephone is your terrifier.
It was, and I just cannot understand why. Part of it was the free rappel. I felt like I was going to lose control of my rappel device. So I can't remember where I learned it, but it's called the Z. Well, you clip a carabiner to your harness and then run the rope through that so that you got that extra friction. It's so much easier to control a free rappel. Ever since then, I've just been, just a wizard on free rappels. I mean, I just love it.
Once you get yourself that critter, you can go back to Telephone, and it won't seem like a big deal at all. You just clip one of those horns as you start to get a little too fast.
I will do that.
So to take us back to Mr. Hall's trail guide.
Yes.
What are the plans for it here on out?
I'm going to finish the Camino series. I'm probably more than halfway through that, and then do a documentary about the whole trip, which I'll publish on that. As I said, we're going to be doing the Trans-Catalina Trail and then Lost Coast Trail. If I don't do the Mount Rainier thing, then I want to do Olympic National Park coastline. I'm going to do more backpacking trips in the Sierras this year, because right now it looks like there's not going to be the snow problem there was last year.
No, I don't think there will be, no.
So lots of that. I would like to do a little bit more backpacking in Joshua Tree. I mean, there's not a lot that you can do there, but still there's some good places to go. My wife and I are going to come back to the Camino in 2025. So that's another big trip. I've got the guidebook for the Tour de Mont Blanc. I want to do that. So those are big plans.
The goal is to just continue indefinitely?
Indefinitely.
And then just see where it goes and see how long you want to do it?
Yeah. It's more like, will my body break down? I don't, okay. I mean,
your body might not because you're giving yourself this excuse to hike all the time.
That's it. I've had some injuries that could have been a lot worse. I mean, at one time we were coming down off Lone Pine Peak, and it was late spring. So we summited and we're coming down, and we start to glissade down the last part down to the lake at the bottom there. The snow was too soft, so I just decided I'll just plunge step down this. And I ended up post-holing in a place. I shouldn't have gone as close to the rocks as I did, and that was my fault. But my left leg post-holed in, and I was going so fast that I plunged forward. And of course, your knee is not supposed to bend in that direction. Right. And I completely tore my ligaments. I had to still hike out, which is a weird experience when you don't have ligaments attached to your knee.
Oh, I think so, yeah.
You go around like a switchback, and your leg is flopping. It is. And I didn't know what was wrong with me at the time. I just thought, well, this is weird, but I did hear a big pop when it happened. The doctor told me that had I not been in as good a shape as I was, that I would have been a lot worse off.
Right, of course, yeah.
And I think that's the case with a lot of stuff where I've fallen or hurt myself or something like that, that it would have been a lot worse. So, yes, absolutely.
So you have to continue the channel just to keep yourself healthy.
And what better excuse is that? As anybody can tell, I'm 70 years old. I still feel like I got 15 years. Good, 15 years. And as long as Mr. Hall's Trail Guide doesn't get tiresome to me, and in fact, right now I've got a pace of, one video a week. I could legitimately back that off if it starts,
for sure.
And I don't think anybody's going to say boo about that. But right now, I love the pace. Something about producing these videos, I love the editing, I love the shooting. When I was shooting documentaries, I learned how to pace something in my brain, edit it before I even shot it, so I would know how everything came together at the end. It's a process that I really adore.
So if people want to watch these, obviously they're on YouTube, so do they just look up Dr. Hall's Trail Guide?
Mr. Hall.
I don't know why I said doctor. Mr. Hall's Trail Guide. Is that the URL for it?
Yeah,
Mr. Hall's Trail Guide?
Mr. Hall's Trail Guide,
okay.
Yeah.
And then if people wanted to find, say, your books or any of your writings or anything?
Amazon. I haven't Googled my name in a long time, but I suppose some of my, I know my articles for Los Angeles Times Magazine are on their website, so you could just look it up by my last name, Sharpsteen. I don't know about any of the other magazine articles, whether they're stored away someplace.
And so now I'm going to take you to the final question that I always ask everyone, which is, what is the final thought you'd like to leave the audience with before you go?
Don't ever miss a chance for adventure. Don't be afraid to do something that's new to you. I meet too many people who seem to feel like if it's out of their comfort zone, they're not going to do it. And I think that's how you grow as a person. Deliberately putting yourself into adventures, something where you don't know how it's going to turn out at the end. That is, for me, one of the best ways to live my life.
Yeah, I do not disagree at all. That's where growth occurs, and that's where change occurs.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a great final thought to leave everyone with. And thanks a bunch for letting me come over here and record this.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You're the blue skies kind, the let's take the long trail kind, the immerse yourself in nature kind, the teach a new generation to love and preserve it too kind, the cold local brews after a day full of adventure kind, the adventurous kind, the friendly kind, the local culture seeker kind, and simply the kind. You're the check out visitparkcity.com right now kind. Park City, Utah, for the mountain kind.
No matter what you're a fan of, Texas has the trip for you. There's the trip to Texas and the trip. Or maybe you're the kind of fan who'd prefer a trip to Texas or a trip. Either way, go to traveltexas.com/get-your-own for the only trip to Texas that matters. Yours.
Travel is great, but planning for travel can be time-consuming and difficult. That's where One Travel comes in. With One Travel, you'll find everything you need to book the perfect trip. Flights, hotels, cars, transportation, it's all right there. With One Travel, you can book online, via app, or even pick up the phone and talk to a travel advisor ready to help you make your selections. Visit onetravel.com/music or call 855-437-2154. Plan it, book it, live it. One Travel.
And now it's that part of the show where I invite you all to go to our website, gogetoutside.com. Look for this, episode 120 with Bill Sharpsteen, and there you will find photographs across Bill's storied life and links to everything we talked about in today's show. And if you should want to get in touch with me here at the show to talk about this episode, future episodes, past episodes, anything in particular, you can do that a number of ways. You can send me an email, jason@gogetoutside.com, or send a text or leave a voice message at 818-925-0106. And if you would, please do me a favor and go to your podcast purveyor of choice. Make sure you are subscribed to the show, and please rate and review it. But most importantly, share it with someone who you think would enjoy it. And this week, in addition to that, why don't you head over to Mr. Hall's Trail Guide on YouTube and make sure you subscribe to that show. There is lots of valuable, entertaining information there. Next time on the show, come back June 16th, Morgan McShay. We will be talking about forest bathing, tiny home living, sustainability, and roller derby. June 16th, Morgan McShay. See you then.
For the next 15 seconds, picture yourself in a small town. Historic buildings with galleries, restaurants, micro distilleries. Forested ridgelines on the horizon. Wide alpine meadows. Evergreen forests threaded with trails. Friendly locals eager to guide you. And if you're not quite ready to leave this fantasy, chances are you're our kind. And you should check out visitparkcity.com right away. Park City, Utah, for the mountain kind.
When it comes to family vacations, there are a million different trips you can take. You can get your own trip to Texas. Or if you prefer a vacation from your family, you can always get your own leave the kids with grandma trip to Texas. So go to traveltexas.com/get-your-own for the only trip to Texas that matters. Yours.
Travel is great, but planning for travel can be time-consuming and difficult. That's where One Travel comes in. With One Travel, you'll find everything you need to book the perfect trip. Flights, hotels, cars, transportation, it's all right there. With One Travel, you can book online, via app, or even pick up the phone and talk to a travel advisor ready to help you make your selections. Visit onetravel.com/music or call 855-437-2154. Plan it, book it, live it. One Travel.
NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. If approved, applications are typically funded the next business day or sooner. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partner. NetCredit. Credit to the people.